right. But yes, just first an introduction to playstorming, which is different from game storming, and why it's a very easy concept, but very useful concept, and ultimately actually is much more like a tool for operation than concept in itself. So, uh, so the concept is very hard to find in the internet. There is, I think, one interview from Ebediah Ravachol, who I think sort of coined it in a small group of game designers a meeting in a bar cafe, and how they approach the games. And yes, I think he's given one interview on it, but there's not much else. There's way more on game storming because it's one of these facilitation concepts. But what in its heart, what playstorming means and how it happened in practice was that there were these game designers who had like various games that were fairly unfinished or just early ideas, and they would meet, and then rather than just wanting to talk about these games, they came up with this approach where even if you had like one mechanic, you would start playing. So really, the image I sometimes use for this is it's like if the game was a house, you had just like beginnings of one room and like some idea of the other rooms. But you would start playing with what you have, and whenever you were stepping out of the things that were there, like that you would go into an area which hasn't any designs yet, any rules or whatever, somebody could propose, what if we have these rules? And then you could continue to play and discover that works or doesn't work and change it and so on. But in this sense, playstorming is um, uh, like there is kind of brainstorming qualities, but it's a very uh, game design oriented approach, and really kind of that's it, which is probably the reason why Epida haven't made much of a number on it. But I do think, like in itself, the approach is rather like generally useful. How to approach playing in general. Like it's a simple thing, but in itself it has a lot of leverage or a lot of usage. So and this is also why I was saying that that in a way we have been using that approach already. Like in many ways, we often start playing with things, that having one or two things, and then kind of playing around them, or playing with them to move into other spaces. And um, and in that sense, like I like playstorming as this sort of idea that doesn't want to make it itself too much of a number and write the seminal book about playstorming, but rather actually makes a very useful approach in a very simple fashion as a kind of just a mindset, and then becomes a sort of a skill though. Like once you start playing uh, on like partially existing rules, like you can learn that as a skill itself. But that makes it all the more interesting. So that's my very short introduction of what playstorming is, which was kind of asked for. But do you want something else on this topic, uh, rather than my rather bread and butter introduction to it?
Do you have ideas of what we would play Storm with?
Um, well, if you want actual playstorming, this is the kind of thing like where I would say, even in the last session and many sessions before it, we were kind of playstorming. Like you could have called that when we started with uh, did we ultimately use the all artworks are puzzles. Yes, I think so, as an Oxel, and then started playing, and then added more stuff and added more stuff. This was very much in the quality of play storming. Um, so um, to, so there is a lot of possibilities. Do you or you all have any proposals?
That's a question I started wondering a couple of days ago and kind of reveals my unknowingness about play in general. Like I had the impression usually you start defining rules and then you move over to play. Like, but I assume there are also approaches that switch that around where you start playing and then you define the rules.
Yeah, this is kind of a mixture of the two. It's almost like a more structured version of kind of child's play. It's like it could happen in the manner that somebody brings even a page of rules, like, but then you start playing and then things start to expand around it, and this is just generated on the spot. So it's very close to kind of child's play, but also kind of like brings more versatility to it.
This is great to hear. Just to, I mean, because this might be interesting to all of you. Eva and me are planning an on residency at the CC Hub, which is on residency in the sense that some of the rules and mechanics of it are to be defined by the participants and the people who join. So I think that's an interesting thing for us to keep in mind, as like playstorming could be a way for us to actually come to the terms of how that actually looks.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I just want that not necessarily to be the subject, but for us, Eva and me, and maybe you, to keep that in the back of your head, and maybe we can come up with something interesting.
When is it going to be?
It's on, so we on residency, right? So we'll know.
Yeah.
Next year.
Okay.
We have like at the moment we have defined it starts about in April or so and will last until October, and people can come and go.
So kind of when it's not too cold.
Yeah.
Yes. Nice.
Yeah, which is a necessity in that house in Austria. There's also this play drive, which I've been pulled into, which is in beginning of June in the same house, but as overlapping, which is supposed to be the game event. I think at least some of you know about it, but that's maybe good to mention because it kind of coexists with this at least for a moment.
That's an absolute play space storm.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm. Because I will most likely, unless something horrible happens or whatever, I will be there at least. I might be other times as well, but like it's maybe an interesting combination. But that's one way to think about it, like this unresidency, like you said, like that could be like one could think about how to give people the basic ingredients that they can start to play, because as you know, like giving people the ingredient of you can do anything is not very effective usually, rarely rarely useful. So so that's one possibility to think about or test about. But I wanted to ask you, I think this was I mean, this is ultimately for everybody, even though like there was varying presence in the session, but towards the end of the last session, like the play/play storming. Oh, first of all, can you see that as play storming, that session?
Absolutely, totally. Like rules being, or not rules, but structures being defined through play.
Yes. Hello, Rock. You just
You.
missed the basic description of playstorming in the boringly informational manner.
No, no.
I can give it to you later at some point. But now we are thinking about where does it exhibits, where this thing exhibits itself. But say again, Pablo, you were saying absolutely, and then you said something that I missed.
I said that absolutely, because there were these structures that were falling into place. Like we were creating structures of creating meaning or assembling a narrative could also be a way to put it, or yeah, making sense of a broader situation and like slowly defining it through this like beast character, um, horse-like entity.
Yes. And maybe I can sneak in towards this because I do think it was interesting and has maybe some usefulness towards the future is like there were a couple of things that one could kind of take out of that session and put into let's say general rules. Now, one thing, so I think our starting was to playtest this Oxel, which was, I think, it was the all artworks are puzzles, just to play that. And then I don't remember, there was some way of went through few images like to have some material, so we essentially threw that into the mix, some essentially paintings, but then continued with the mid-journey generations that Pablo, you were doing. Like the first thing I would point out is like you could make a rule like or just point out how it generally works, that however little definition this kind of Oxel approach has, like the Oxel all artworks are puzzles is like an alteration to how to view life, roughly speaking, like, or material coming from there. And however small it is, it's already playable. And then like what's the kind of like an empty space of it, or kind of still mysterious space of it is the thing you play. That, and you might play it by bringing material to it, like an image or further definitions or further rules or whatever, but they all kind of like create this sort of interplay between something that is there like a play piece, like the images were play pieces, and then something that is more like almost like this sort of area in question or in mystery, which is almost like the quest to play with. I remember actually before that we ended up there was this one work where there was jigsaw pieces underneath like the whole artwork, and there came these ideas about how jigsaw pieces are have this sort of almost like a larger meaning in itself, like, and you could have added that to, like, let's say the conventions of the people who consider all artworks as puzzles, that they have this convention of like figuring out jigsaw pieces, but they see those as concepts of like things looking for connections and looking for things that they belong to. And now you would have a little bit more, and you could start play from that, like those two things. So however little or however lot you have in terms of rules or definition, call it whatever, you are always able to play that to whatever scope, like it can grow from there. But whenever you play, you can almost save like game saves from the play and put that into maybe the original form or a saved version of the original form. That then becomes a new like starting point for play. And while that might sound nerdy, but I do think there is a kind of like an interesting play definition loop or certain kind of approach to rules is like, okay, you have this ways of starting to play with culture where you can invite others if they share the voxel with you. Like, oh, I also approach all the artworks like puzzles. But you can start that simple, and whenever you add something, you can figure it out and it becomes a new piece in relation to the earlier one. Like now, we have this concept of jigsaw pieces, and it's different than the normal culture, but it becomes like complementary material, and so on and so on. And I think that's rather powerful, but maybe I'm too nerdy about this. I don't know, but does that resonate? I guess is the word I'm looking for. You must say something, otherwise.
Yes, it totally resonates.
It resonates. I still have my issues with the metaphor of a puzzle because, like, we've discussed that already last time. Puzzles, like, are jigsaw pieces. They're supposed to fit into each other, and or unless you kind of take a knife and slice something out, it's not possible to do anything without it. Whilst your concept is designed for this extreme openness that you can take whatever you want and you can fork it and do something else with it, which you cannot do with jigsaw pieces normally, unless or you have squares as jigsaw pieces, or I don't know.
Yet I kind of share those, but then I've been looking for a concept that would fit what you're saying, that would be like a puzzle piece, but then be open. And I don't think such a thing exists. Like it would really be a puzzle. Like I'm trying to figure this out, but there's no one answer. Like so then the other possibility is kind of like hijacking a concept. Like I mean, if I was fancy and theoretical, I would say we make a catachretic usage of the concept of puzzle, because catachresis is a trope that is an usually intentional, sometimes unintentional misuse of a concept. So like it's intentionally starting to play with puzzle in order to warp the concept. And I think it's valid. It's not like that's the better approach, but it's a valid approach. And I think it was kind of present in that, like it started to warp what a puzzle is. Um, um, what the atoms? I missed that. What did you mean by atoms, Eva?
Maybe as an alternative metaphor, taking just like, I mean, these are not the smallest pieces, but like you can combine them in various ways, and they're a little bit more open, even though also there you have restrictions. And
Yeah, like you could have many.
ideal.
I'm thinking a combination of the two ideas, maybe having like a quantum jigsaw puzzle piece that is, it can be any kind of form or shape, but until you define what it's used for, it actually becomes one of the pieces, right? But as you just imagine it and don't look at it, it can be any. So it has both components of openness, but also it actualizes into a specific shape when you need it. So maybe with some subatomic qualities, we can make the openness happen.
But here's my, like, I have a particular allergy with quantum, which is kind of nitpicky, but which is that game forms actually hide, let's say, a more understandable yet more flexible take on what the structuration that quantum and quantum superposition and the various forms of behavior in quantum have, but it's just people don't notice it. Although there's one person who has kind of noticed those basic directions, which would be Burr-Hess, the promise theory guy, who used to be a quantum physicist. He actually is one of the one of the my sympathies for him. That was, he started by saying placing quantum physics in its very normal corner, like so. But the key thing, like I said this to some of you, but I'll kind of be short with it. It's like actually any like game exhibits behavior that we know for or we expect from like quantum behavior. Like if you have a board game and in the board game there is an area that might give you, you know, like black coal pieces or I don't know, like brown wood pieces. But it's currently giving neither, but then it requires some player going in and then selecting or spending some other token to decide whether it's black coal pieces or brown wood pieces. That's actually settling of the position. But now we can not only see that there is a superpositional behavior, that there is a thing that exists with multiple positions, and then there are logics that set those positions to be something or other. But you have much more like a handle on it. Like you can create like 7 dimensions of superposition. Like you can find a board game where there's like, oh, like you selected the black coal pieces, but then like if you go back there, you might make it to produce 2 coal pieces and maybe also gold, and like there's a whole lot of variants. But it's not super complicated. It's just, but in terms of the quantum behavior, it's more complicated than what we normally think of as quantum behavior. But anyway,
Yeah,
that's
as like as a description of the potential of any oxel, like all of the potentials are superpositioned until they get collapsed into a move or whatever.
I think the one thing, and I promise to shut up about this.
Your quantum allergy. This is you, like the manifestation of you sneezing to an encounter with quantum.
Yeah, yes, like the one thing I like that quantum has brought to conversation, which is not yet present, but or popularly, but probably will be at some point, is that if you move your metrics or measures of the world from trying to be outside of the world, like the old school way, to rather being a game piece that is part of the process, observing other game pieces, then everything becomes quantum behavior by nature. It's actually what you expect rather than not. And that kind of tells that rather going to this deeper level is us recognizing as not something outside of the system, but as being inside the game, being inside the system, the same system where the things are that we're looking at. And then it actually becomes super normal. Anyway, that's my...
Are you referring to sort of like the acknowledgement of the observer has benefited notions of, like, for example, the game master being a player of the game? Is this what you're saying, more or less?
I mean, it's one reflection, but also like going back to this earlier board game example, it's another reflection of that. But it's more like this, like if you were, rather than somebody looking at the game from the outside, but you were one of these pieces looking at these options, like you were one of the pieces that the players move, looking at these options of like, I could go there and turn that, or somebody could go there and turn that into coal pieces or wood pieces. Then things start behaving in a quantum-like manner. And then often the mystery of them is merely that you don't see the logic behind them because you don't see that far. So, but it now I'm getting boring because like this is just like it's actually interesting direction to use, but we can use it way beyond what we currently think in quantum if we just see how games work. And I get off my soapbox now.
Let's then drop the quantum and find a way to make these jigsaw puzzles both open and closed.
Okay, so here's a couple of ways, and this is kind of maybe starting to get slightly placed on. So if we start from like in terms of like a proposal, not yet engaging, but we start from the same all artworks are puzzles thing, but then we add to it goal is expansion of the concept of the puzzle into an open-ended answer structure. That's a boring way of putting it. But what I'm pointing out with that is now the Oxel is different, like in a way, like it's partly all artworks are puzzles, which is like going out and when you see an artwork, you approach it differently. But then it's also putting like a goal, like which is like semi-role, which is like you're doing this and meanwhile tracking and trying to develop how the puzzle concept works. Was that too dry? Probably.
No, it's very helpful, actually. Yeah, can see it.
And this is also kind of old school XORG, but like good to remember is like how all expressions are ultimately have a rule-like behavior, because even reading some sentence is kind of rules in itself because it's you figuring out the meaning, which is like a game to play. Like reading is a game in this sense. But then if we utilize that to the core, then this kind of possibilities is that they can be played. Just like you can play all artworks are expressions or goal warp the concept of puzzle into an open-ended concept.
Does it make sense then to share that experience somehow, or how?
Yes, I think that's the key thing, and this is also why I was saying that there is a kind of a maybe very close to a communicable game here, is because like playing that game then becomes like there is a fertility to sharing in a sense that it can become the starting point of play for others. Like said, like, okay, if we played this or artworks are puzzles and then we had this goal and we developed this concept of the jigsaw piece, which is like that, let's say every word or concept can be like a jigsaw, and then its behavior is actually like a jigsaw piece, and then its behavior is like desiring connections, desiring fitting connections. And but let's say that emerges through play, and then you write a short paragraph describing this style that can be added to the game, and therefore whatever is being played communicates back to the game, creating more playability.
We could try to do some I don't know if it's anomaly mining, but some mining maybe to try to extract those interesting characteristics of a jigsaw puzzle, like that a piece desiring fitting connections. Like that's so provocative, and it could become like a mechanic of something else or of this component or.
Yeah, it's okay. I have one move on this. Like you've said, I mean, it's loose enough. Doesn't matter that it's kind of loosely set up the situation, but I can make a move on your setup, which is that one way to imagine to a kind of metaphoric image the jigsawness, jigsaw piece-ness of a piece of meaning, whether concept or word or whatever, is to imagine this sort of that underneath, for example, every image there are these sort of hidden lines of connections and separation. which have somehow found their connection. That's one image. Then the second image is whenever you have a piece that is floating about, whether that's a word or whether that's an image, you can start to imagine, like, how does it want to connect? And if you have another piece next to it, which is separate, like say another image, you can start to see what would be a point of attraction, like, or a line thread of attraction that they would like to connect on. I'm getting abstract, so I'm trying. Maybe I can get some helpful pictures. Maybe, I don't know. I'll. But was that in any manner sensible?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it was.
Sorry, I think I missed the first part because Rock's video started playing. And anyway, but another interesting characteristic of jigsaw or puzzles in general is like this oscillation between meaning of the piece and like meaning of the entireness of like the combination of different pieces. There are different dimensions of combinatorics and meaning.
Yes, I would agree. And then I'll do a quick sharing of the screen to make this slightly more concrete in terms of playfulness. So let's put like so. Okay, this is like 2 seconds and of searching. So this is not anything fancy, but so I found this image randomly and this one. And there are now jigsaw pieces. What is the, like, between this and this, like how this could desire or naturally slot into this or vice versa. Just as a proposal, which is not anymore any kind of a solution, but almost like try to kind of start fitting or almost like sewing the jigsaw piece. I'm kind of seeing like this figure in this environment. Another is that these oysters or sea life are in there, in the water that is dropping. So that's like one thread. But then that thread creates a desire already, or a kind of meaning, like electricity wire in a way. Like, okay, if the oysters and sea life are there, does it mean that the figure is sitting underneath? There is some light there, like windows, or is this pool there? So the pieces are starting to fit together from this desire in itself.
I also think, I mean, that could totally be a fitting connection. I also think that making them jigsaw puzzles, and this is referring to what Eva was saying, you acknowledge that they are just a small portion of something larger, right? So there's no puzzle of 2 pieces. Well, maybe there is, but they're not very common. So they're like, we are by effect of using this rule with these 2 images, also creating the space for many other pieces to fit in that maybe complete the meaning of this. So you can, in that sense, also leave it incomplete. Like you can say, yeah, this person is just there eating one of the oysters from there. And that might be enough because another piece might come later that adds context to that connection, right?
And it already opens this idea of an open puzzle. It's more like, if one thinks about in terms of concrete jigsaw puzzles, it's almost like you got a bunch of pieces, but you think there are way more pieces somewhere, but you don't know where, and you start playing around with them, and a couple of them connect, and they create something that is in itself already more than the pieces alone, but like who knows how large and what it could grow, which is kind of making jigsaw pieces into an open structure. But like from here, just to highlight, I'm talking too much, but I'll just say this, like to highlight that there's already a different approach, like now changing the concept of jigsaw piece and puzzles and the approaches here, like even this sort of almost like game mechanic operations, like take two pieces of whatever media and look at them together to find desired connections and propose them. All of these are creating new cultural approaches, which then lead to new cultural generation, which is kind of like, I think, one of the potential strengths of the Oxel approach.
What I find interesting as well, a regular jigsaw puzzle has like a definite amount of pieces in itself, but like the combinatorics and like the stories you can build upon it like are indefinite.
Yeah, like yeah, it's a possibility to like if the jigsaw had the sense of indefiniteness from the get-go and never relinquished, that was never released, it would be kind of like this also.
Yeah, I guess you get the drive to put the pieces together because you know and you want to get to the full final picture. Whereas if there's this sort of composability of keeping adding without necessarily ending towards a final, then certainly the attitude change as well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the aim whilst you're playing, is it to get to the final picture and produce this final, or to just discovering through adding layers new narratives and yeah, that are not necessarily related to this revealing of the final picture, but it's more the adding.
I think the do say, I can say later.
No, that's it.
Oh, okay. I think the default play is kind of growth, not like a final picture. Like you could also always add that you want to build to something, but that is not necessarily a final picture. Like you could put a goal towards the puzzle pieces, which is figuring out who this person is.
Yeah, I meant the final pictures with the traditional puzzles. You know what I mean? With the traditional jigsaw.
Yeah.
You add the pieces because you want to get to the final completed picture.
Yeah.
Which is not necessarily this approach of connecting and adding more meanings to the piece in relation to the piece before, to a whole, which is not necessarily, which will never be ending or defined, because this can be played on and on and on.
Yes.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I agreed. And there is always this possibility of like always adding new connections. Like if you take this figure person and then let's say I propose a connection, which is not necessarily set, but like a way to try to fit the puzzle pieces. I say this figure is, yes, the oysters are here, but what it's thinking about while we're looking at this image is this. And now it changes again, like it becomes a different kind of, but it's always a generator. That's why it's not so much about the limits and the finality, because all the forms you get are new generators. And generators are more about growth than finality.
And going back to what Eva was saying, I think the fact that we don't know how many pieces this jigsaw has is actually the hack to make it always eternally open. Like it's both closed and open, because you can always keep on adding meaning. So yeah, and each time you add something, as we're doing now, it's sort of as if the shape of the pieces would be changing to allow for this to come in, right?
Mhm.
But
I
I have a
think
question. Sorry.
Yeah.
No, go on, go on.
Okay, I think this is also possible if we know the number of pieces we have. Even if this number is defined, we can create like this indefinite number, or like the openness is there still, I think.
Yes, I agree.
But my question would be, why are we calling this still a jigsaw?
Well, that depends. Like for me, like calling something is much less of a question, is it the right name? And much more of a question, if you call it that, does it open up an interesting generative direction? Like, I mean, you could call it something else, but like in a way, like if you think that this is kind of jigsaw building, or even puzzle building, but once again, in an open situation with no right solutions and indefinite amount of connections. And way to play the puzzles could be many, but if one way is that there is this move of like essentially proposing connections, which others could integrate if they want to, then you're kind of building a puzzle. Whether it's a jigsaw is like another question.
To me, it makes me think about domino
Mhm.
more than a jigsaw.
Mhm.
Where maybe where you know that then of course, I mean, of course, there's an aspect of stopping almost, but you know, you can create sort of derivatives path in the domino path. I don't know.
I mean, could be.
I think this, like what you're talking about right now, is I think you're describing the problem I had with the metaphor of jigsaws, because it creates this image of it has to fit together, and this is what we try, or I think this is what we try to overcome in the beginning, like saying that there is still this openness included, even though we have this idea of how a jigsaw puzzle works.
Yeah.
It's a question of whether it overcomes the fact that, okay, saying that the oysters and the sea life are here, it is a connection. It's a way to make them fit together. But at the same time, it opens up like I think quite kind of concrete understanding that, well, that is a way they fit together, but there's infinite amount of ways they could fit together. So is that enough to build this sort of sense that you kind of shift in your sense of thinking about jigsaw and puzzle, or not? I mean, for me, it would be enough, but maybe like people have different readings of it.
Yeah, no, I guess so. I guess it's enough. It's just the jigsaw to me points to this big say this relationship, the relations between the bigger and the pieces, which I see as embedded in the puzzle as the jigsaw puzzle as a media. It's a medium, which is not is something that I don't necessarily see here. It's much more open-ended than a jigsaw to me, because yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking like there's one way, obviously you could play this kind of linearly, jump from one to the next, and not really referring to the first one. Like I like this jigsaw idea. Maybe, you know, it could be a 4-sided or even 6-sided, and you know, you have one relation and then you put one here, but then the initial one still has a bunch of free spaces left for another kind of strand, and maybe those meet somewhere, you know, 20 steps up somewhere, and so on. But this concept is, yeah, you could fit any kind of shape in here that allows for like from infinite to one to, yeah, to restricted to just one, or like linear or 6 or 4. Yeah.
And the kind of direction you were already kind of drafting a design towards, rock would open another way of playing it. What if you say, like, okay, one way to do that would be to say that every connection is a side, for example, And maybe accepting that the oysters are here as one connection set. I mean, it could be done in other ways, but that's one way to think about it. Like, mm, but then if you play it in that manner, that there are these sides, then it becomes a different generator again. But to Linda's question, like whether it's called jigsaw, I mean, there's probably some fancy word coinings one can be smart about in this kind of area, which is like, what is a hack of the word jigsaw? I don't know, jacksaw, not probably, but maybe somebody comes up with a better word that reminds of a jigsaw, but kind of mutates it.
I just realized I have a card next to me that, or it is about a mosaic. Maybe that's another way of looking at it.
Yeah, actually, yes. Mosaic would be like, because yeah, actually mosaic is a promising thing because it kind of is like a jigsaw where the pieces have much more flexibility in their composition, like and also if you want to coin it, like rather than call it the puzzle, you could call it the, I don't know, guzzle, which is like game puzzle. Maybe that's not the best word either, but like but like these are also ways to kind of tailor how to create the approachability. But I think the key thing about the approachability is to get the people not so much towards the correct, but kind of to accept the different angle, like to be just like metaphors are, isn't like it's metaphoric behavior rather than just being meaning. An unconventional connection of words, it's an unconventional connection of behaviors, but those behave like metaphors as well. But as a game designer, I kind of like the direction. Is this in the world where we have so much separate, fragmented stuff, like just taking some of the stuff and connecting them to grow something larger or something more nuanced is an interesting direction in itself. And of course, it could happen in many other forms. It doesn't have to be images like paintings here. It could be, sounds, text, whatever.
I really like the rule that Rock hinted to of like having specific number of connections that each piece could have. Like I imagine that could be a very productive way of being precise about the connections one is making. And also I'm imagining it might be very valuable if you find a piece that can connect to two other pieces or more, in the sense of the jigsaw becomes tighter, right? Like there's less holes in between, if you see it in a topology way. But you're also limiting more potential new connections because it's taking two slots. So I like that mechanic.
And in what you're describing, Pablo, you actually create an interesting hybrid that is both closed, but not in a way like a closed puzzle, like jigsaw puzzle. It's like, okay, let's say you only get these 6 pieces, like images, text, whatever, and you can only create 2 connections between each. And you can come to a point where you have 2 connections for all of them. And then you're kind of finished the thing. But why it's not a closed puzzle is because, once again, there is no right answer. If it's sort of played in the manner that this was played, like you really cannot predict what is the outcome of that, even though there is a way to finish the game. So it's both closed but open in terms of what is the final outcome of it.
And if you're maybe aspiring to make a bigger image, a bigger puzzle, then you have to find connections to one of the pieces that are not related to any of the other pieces, with the intention of opening up new slots. So you have to, because if you bring a piece that can connect to another, someone might call you out and be like, hey, these two obviously connect. So then the puzzle gets closer. So depending, like there might be like a hidden struggle between keeping it open or closing it up that I find interesting as well.
Yeah. And in terms of kind of nerdy game designer oxalization of it, you can have the oxel, which is simply this game of like that takes in pieces, which could be anything, and then what it sets is these rules, like about making the connections and so on, like but then you could include that into like an oxel of a cultural movement of imaginary gardens. And this is one of the ways they build gardens, or gardens of meaning. And then this is, yeah, like then you have figured one perspective, one snapshot of this a culture that builds gardens of meaning. You have this one game that they play, but you could have much more. Now that is opened in itself. Like
I'm still sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead. I talked enough.
Just jumping on that, I was still staring at that card here, and what I found quite interesting is like it is an image of a mural on a wall, and I think here in the middle that's a window. So like thinking about blank pieces as well, pieces that are undefined and they are yet to be found to fit in or not to fit in or just to create something new. I find that's like I really like it's just yeah. I really like that I found that card that fits so well this discussion right now.
Yeah, I think it's also when you move the mode to actively searching for connections in a kind of expressive manner, not like what is the right one. There also everything in the environment starts to, you know, like once you start looking for doors, they start to appear everywhere. Or when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Maybe that's a better metaphor, but I like your idea of this sort of undefined, that there is something that is more like a question almost, like it's an empty one, but it's yet to be defined in itself, like it could be part of the play.
I mean, if, for example, if you look at that image, like what is the liquid in the glass? It seems to be wine, but it can be anything. There's also like this undefined space within a defined picture.
And now that you opened this question, I started looking, because if he was thinking about this, which is not said, is there any water here? Because he could be drinking water from here. Anyway, like it just points out how there are these roots. But like these become these sort of seeds. Like the oysters were a seed that could be planted in the soil of this, or this was the seed that could be planted in the soil of oysters, like goes both ways. But then this is a seed currently not planted. But once it's planted, there is a connection itself. But just to also like build in this background, if you would kind of wrap this all into a culture that builds this sort of gardens of meaning, and it becomes almost like create your own culture kind of phenomena, is like by creating this, you create this sort of kind of semi-fictional movement or artificially created movement or playfully created movement that then search other gardens and then uses for them, like this leads to like when things are connected together, there is like more space to contemplate. Like there's always the, like in this case, you can contemplate the images themselves, but you can contemplate the connections and you can contemplate the relations and so on. So the space just grows. So if you build this kind of gardens, you have like more rich basis of growth of meaning.
So I was gonna say that it's kind of apparent that this world building area of making connections seems to probably be more interesting than, you know, composition or color or something like that based connections. But maybe it would be an interesting challenge to create a map of meaning out of which some kind of image or pattern forms, or that could be one of the rules, I suppose.
I
But
mean, you can
no.
combine them as well. Like,
Yeah.
like in a way, this can be reflected back to your game changers, like that there are elements in there which are like, let's say, this sort of hard game mechanics, like you throw 2 dice and select, and that means that you either go here or here, period. But then there are elements that are generative, is like when you land it here, then you have to create this sort of description or your argument, and while you have like a framework for it, that's completely expressive. And like I think like in terms of games, like there has been this sort of growth towards recognizing how much there is untapped and unexplored in this generative capability of whether it's new thinking or new conceptions or new ways of understanding and so on. But those can be done in combination of setting something that is more like hard rule like, with some which is then just like creating a room for the more open generation that stems from it.
Yeah. I was also thinking like we've been staring at these images for a while, but we could contemplate, yeah, what other things might be used and how that changes things.
Do you have any proposals?
Well, I don't know. Eva had a card. Maybe we could start
show it.
with the card, and someone else then makes a move. Actually, yeah. Oh wait, it's blurring in. I think I have to turn off some function here. Blur the background, yes.
Oh, it's a. Is it a cat-like figure?
It's in the Netherlands. There's this pole at the beach, and there's a cat on the pole, and there's a crow on top of the cat.
It's already kind of a puzzle. There's 2 pieces with the 2 animals.
What if we combine this with some of the Evas? If you put like low tech, like we have both. Because the one thing I can say from this kind of generated play is 2 is very much stronger than 1. Like it's like there comes this whole land between. I mean, my easy or my first would be like how the pole that has a cat that has a raven on it is it's a kind of a totem, but what kind of a totem and for whom? So now it's kind of connecting that to the question.
A very little bit unrelated to that, sorry, but I also like the structural similarities again. Like there's this, it is an image, and in both cases there is also a framing of it. Like, and it is visually the same. It has a white frame around it.
Yeah.
And like in some of the cases here, it is even intended that we can, or I can turn it around, whilst in others, it's the same as for rocks.
And let me see if I
Bo
can.
both of them have like this, I mean, in various degrees, but they're composed of multiple elements, like the two animals or the multiple pictures. Like you could already think of maybe breaking them into their components and using each component individually as a way, as a mechanism to compose a new thing between the two. Which I guess is jigsaw-y.
There's also color association, pretty much. Rockman fits very well in this mosaic with the in terms of color and tonalities. It could be like just in between the two. God, I don't know what they're doing, but it's two figures with the black one in the middle because tones are the same.
They're almost also like cards. Like you could have them separate and like in a stack. And then you get one or two of them. Well, that's a lot. Like you could have like
I do have a pile of cards actually.
Yeah, but even the kind of mosaic pieces could be cards themselves. Like and then you get like one or two of them in itself. Like I think like in these kind of connections, it's always the more stuff there is in the sources and more there's also like stuff that can be related, the easier the connection making gets. That's a general quality. Like there like another trick which is kind of what I used in the totem for the cat is if you cannot think of anything, like there's this interesting quality that anything you see can be thought of either as a religious object, item, situation, anything religious. Like everything can seem religious. Like if you look at in the background of Eva, there is a microwave or something, but we could say that that in itself is a religious object, and that can work. Like but you can also say that anything is an art object event, whatever. That also works. Like, that's an art piece, and that opens up. And then you can say anything is a piece or element in a game. That and they are different. Like if that is religion, you can imagine the situation where, like, the microwave is this sort of daily meditation. That when you come from the wherever you are and you're making your meal, then the slight background noise of the microwave and the waiting for it as this sort of moment of meditation that this culture uses, and that can open up a direction in itself. Like so, there is like what, by the way, that says about our culture, that there is this sort of just general flexibility of religion, art, and games. And I've been pressed to find others. Like there's probably others, but like those are the most universally applicable. I think it tells something about religion, art, and games. that they are closer than they think.
There's a lot of belief involved in the three of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like and maybe that's the belief is the creative medium that can be used. I mean, like this is I mean, easy would be that it's a, I don't know, altarpiece, but you could also say these are the symbolic archetype figures of a certain religion, or these are the pieces of the game that you play with. You're playing with human portraits, and there were some ships there. What is a game that plays with warships and human portraits? Sort of sounds like an interesting game itself.
Or believe in a nation, believe in humanity, believe in people, believe in minds.
The microwave.
What was the last one, Linda? The believe in microwaves, or what did you say?
Yeah, I said the microwave.
There's also a microwave behind Pablo.
Is there?
I'm
Let's see.
sorry to say, but it's an oven. It has no microwave capacity. But there is one behind you, or is that also an oven?
Like, that's the oven.
So the one on top, is it a microwave?
That's a microwave, yes.
I mean, in this religion, you could have like that it's a holy moment of transforming something into food, and depending on the food and your own mental state, you might either prepare it in the microwave or in the oven, but you would have to kind of properly consider that, and that creates its own directions. But yeah, like I do think like this, but like underneath here, like even in this connection making, still the structure, like maybe it's nerdy, but I do think it's kind of like interesting in its potential. Is this, okay, let's take this connection game of the images, and let's say, or whatever the images are, and then somebody makes the rules for it, and then somebody makes some play of three images, like we did there, and puts the three images somewhere, and writes down the connections they made. Like both of them are playable. Like in anything you create becomes back to being playable, not just being like a description of how things are, not just like a normal post, but a new playable basis.
I'm wondering if we could use this to build a bridge to at least starting the conversation about the organ structure for EXA.
I can quickly go through it, like, and you can have questions. Like, okay, I'll do that. I'll just find the screen that I was supposed to show, which is here. All right, and then I'll share the screen. Okay, so there would be a lot to highlight. As a kind of background story, this is something I originally made fairly ready, like couple of, like between 2 years ago and 1 year ago, something like that, like which is this sort of like a game like organization structure, but it's become now relevant again because it's kind of like some of the elements are becoming a basis of the new EXA network definition of organization. Like for example, the new member rights are mostly copy paste of this. But like the key thing I wanted to say here is like they're looking at the organs side is if we take traditional organization, like something that is like a, I don't know, a cooperative or just an association, whatever, like we can break it into modular pieces that are actually quite easy to make, but then reveal a lot of flexibility. So to take an example, rather than thinking that we have a member, just like, which then becomes this sort of convention, we just think we have roles. Well, the role could be called a member, but the key thing of the role is to tell what are its rights. But now the rights actually point out to the organization itself. Like, so for example, if a member has the right to make a vote, that is pointing out that there is some operation that contains this sort of possibility of voting, and that's where the root of that right is. Like, in a way, the organization is creating these new rights towards its own scope, and then the roles like members come and fulfill or take up those rights to utilize it. So if you start this way, is like, first of all, you think like what kind of elements you need for an organization. You have this role, and which is merely kind of like rights, which are then pointers to the organization. Then you think like, what does the organization need, first of all? Well, first of all, you could say that most of the organization, not all of them, but most of them have, because they're kind of like creatures in a way, they usually have some decision making. Like usually it's something like a board or whatever. But we can simply think that we can create a set of rules, which is the decision making protocol, operation, call it whatever. Then you need like operations that bring in new roles like members, and potentially can also let go of members with some kind of structure. And in a way, like that almost would be enough to describe almost everything of a basic organization itself. Like, because let's say that there are these rules of setting, like, let's say any member has the right to make a proposal to the decision protocol. And then the decision protocol, any member can then vote upon these proposals. Then you can propose to that protocol really anything, whether it's like whether we take a new member or whether we open up this new project, etc. And or how do we use the funds or answer to some other organization's question itself, or offer to us to the organization. So I think I'm slightly failing on this being short about it, because I'm making it short, but at the same time I'm probably missing pieces and making it a little bit too jumpy. Let me see if I can kind of slightly change it to a summary. Okay, if we have these roles and we think of the roles as rights, we don't like that creates members, but we start from this clearness as what are the rights and how are the rights pointing to the organization itself. If we then think of operations that are needed for the organization, like operations of decision making, operations of taking people in, but these operations can be thought modularly, that they can be their own elements. You can, first of all, create any traditional organization in this manner, but you can make them in a completely modular Lego-like fashion. It's like, okay, we like in this EXA, there's two like decision protocols. One of them is the consideration protocol, which is kind of like the board, which is simply that anybody can write an issue to consider, which is kind of, we should change this and so on, then that becomes a topic for consideration where anybody can propose an answer to that, like, yes, we go this way, or we do this and that, and so on. And that then becomes the point of voting, that everybody can vote, and you can set that to be whatever, 50%, 66%, and so on. But that in itself is like covering something like board-like behavior. But then, like, as a kind of difference, I made this sort of offer structure, which is slightly different rules. It's mostly about the key thing here is, like, it's not about everything that everybody has to vote upon, but it's more like I offer something and I tell everybody what I need for it. If the others can fill those needs, like do tasks for it and so on, then it's a go. So now this organization has two different modular protocols, one being consideration protocol, which is more like voting, and the offer protocol, which is more like, hey, I could start this, but I need this and that. And that the decision is, if this and that is fulfilled, then that is becomes something that the organization does. But like, we could take either of these off or add others as structures themselves, and change the organization in a Lego-like manner. And while this seems like a lot of rules, actually, if you compare this to a normal organization, it's way less, way less. Of course, you can say that there are certain rules that normal organizations have towards the legal code of a country, this and that. But even the kind of operative rules for organizations are often way more complicated than this. So, like, okay, in this case, it's running about 10 pages or so, but like doing the same thing in a normal organizational fashion would be like 30, 40 pages or whatever. Like, so, okay, not the best explanation. I'm slightly maybe tired from my COVID, but maybe that gave some starts, and maybe you have questions that can make my slightly fragmented explanation better.
I guess for contextualization, maybe the intention of this node or organ structure is for EXA to be organized in a more network fashion, right? For the people to be able to come and have clear forms of interacting with the network in a way that facilitates projects.
Yes, and the funny thing, if you approach it this way, you can even create a network just on paper, because, like, what is the basic document of an organization, or a codex as it's called? It's merely telling, okay, these are the roles that we recognize. These are definitions of the roles, which are then rights. These are the people we recognize having that role. These are the other operations that we have. And then, like, that list, or that, well, I guess it's a sort of a list of things, is creating a network node in itself. Like, even like thinking fairly strongly in the sense of network structure, that is like a node itself. If there appears another organization that, say, wants to offer one of these organizations a right to, say, make offers to it, what they can add to their definition is, like, we give a right to this organization to write offers here, which is our, let's say, our offer protocol. And now you created a relation. And of course, the point is not that it only has to be on basic text. But the point is that if you can do it on this sort of basic text level, it tells that you have a lot of flexibility when you start to take it into programmable mediums and so on. And like, even though it's super simple, it actually forms this sort of n-dimensional space because the nodes really function as like new points in this space of potential. And if somebody creates a new node and somebody creates a relation with it, like for example, giving it a right, they have a relation to that node. And that space can grow essentially infinitely in terms of its expansion. Yeah, I'm like I said, it's probably putting too many things at once, but maybe that is understandable from there.
So as far as I understand it, it's a very open network that is based on needs rather than a predefined setup where everything is already predefined, and like every player with or every node in this network can create their own relations, their own realm in order to operate in the way how it is required, or how it is required is the wrong word. In a way, it serves this node. So it's a very open structure, as I understand it.
Yes, it has this sort of capability of openness. To turn it into a practical example, like let's say person X and Y wanted to create their own organizational node. Now they can easily create that, like they create their own rules and so on. And this is not a threat to any of the other organizations in this kind of a structure. Why? Because nothing forces the others to have a relation with it. It's up to their choice whether they form a relation. And of course, the relation can be also many things. Like said, it could be, hey, we offer you a chance to come and make offers into us, or to come and listen, but not to make proposals in our considerations, whatever it is. And it can also be like, you could put temporal time, like, hey, we give you the right to make offers for 2 months. And all of that kind of flexibility in the expression, starting from this basis that any new creation is actually not putting any pressure of others, of acknowledging them beyond what they want to acknowledge from it, is a kind of key part of why this creates a very healthy substrate of creating network organizations.
I want to ask you, because this is at the end, it is being put forward as a way of interacting with the EXA network in a broader way, and for you to share a language on how that interaction takes place. So I'm wondering if you think of these nodes in the similar way as you referred to this misconception of DAOs, as the node is not the organization, but is
yes.
a tool of the organization to
Yeah.
actually engage in communication with the EXA network.
Yeah, it's kind of like one could say that it's almost like it's not the organization, but it's an organizer. Like its presence creates a possibility of organization, but because of this need of commitment for others, that organizing that it does only has the effect to the extent that has decided to include its effect into itself.
Yeah. For example, I'm imagining if we were to utilize this within XORG to communicate with the EXA network, we already have structures, maybe not as established, but like we have some structures with which we work. So if we wanted to establish a relationship with the EXA network, we would have to speak the language of the node, but maybe we can just manage that translation from our social interactions into a language that speaks that understands the language of the node. But whereas if maybe an organization that is born out of the network is from the beginning working in a more legible way for the network, that would be a different case. Like, I'm thinking how the interface to organizations that already have structures in place, yeah, it's just like there's some friction in that space, not in a bad way, but it's interesting. Yeah,
I think essentially both are possible, like the fact that you build everything inside this network, or you have one arm of yourself in the network. And I think actually in most cases, even organizations that have most of their stuff in this network still have things that are outside. And you can even bring stuff outside. Like, let's say you have, like we have a company in Finland. You can write in this network that this considerations protocol has the right to send initiatives to the company itself. Like, and the company has the right to write proposals. So you're actually making a version of the company like a role in a way into the network itself. So you can actually quite flexibly operate on these hybrids and create forms for them. But then also, like, maybe as a kind of slightly more concrete point, or slightly less abstract, I guess. Like, if we look at then what does a creation of an organization kind of comes to, is like, if you look at the member, like there's this sort of, like, this is really writing game rules in the language of rights, but still like game rules for organization. Like, a member has a right of representation, but then that's written in a form that you have a right to speak for EXA, but every time you speak for EXA, it's not for EXA as a whole, but you describe EXA as a member. And every time you do so, it must be that instance should be added to the record, which is some, for example, a document somewhere. So, like, this is one way to create rules about how there is a network and everybody has a right to speak for it, but there's nobody who can say, like, I'm the voice of the network. You can speak about it, but you cannot be that. But then maybe another is this invitation. Like, there is every member can extend or offer the rights of being a member to others, meaning anybody outside of the network. But there's a condition. Okay, of course, it needs to be added to the record as an offer, but then that offer must be accepted by 3 other members. So practically, rather than the board deciding who's the new member, any member can say, I think this person should be the member. I would offer the rights to that person, and if 3 other persons support that offer, then the network grows. So rather than having a central decision, you have a distributed decision, essentially. And of course, that number could be different. Like, here it's 3 other members that need to support it. It could be 4, it could be 10% of whatever it is. Like, that's easy. But so it's very much this, like, you take these sort of basic thematics that are in organizations, like how do you become a member, what can you do as a member, and you turn it into like a general method of expression that is very flexible but also very game-like, and then you put them all in a kind of modular form and in the spaces of a kind of like a network space of organizations where every connection is a kind of committed relation and therefore always new nodes can be created because and others don't have to accept them as is. So I don't think I got the. I could have gone to why these are kind of like body parts, why there is a mind, and why there is a like a metabolism of members, and thinking of it like that would is actually rather interesting, and this kind of reflects that and so on. I think my brain is actually saying some kind of an end because of the remnants of the disease, maybe. So I'm not probably managing the explanations in the best manner, but I do think overall the structure actually works quite well, like in terms of structurality of it. Then the other thing is, of course, to play it into existence, which is another question altogether.
I think this was a very good introduction to the structure, and we can have a session where we brainstorm with it, or we work it through or something.
Yeah, the one possibility is to create other kinds of organizations, even with this language, even much smaller ones. Like, so there is a lot of flexibility here. Like, say, if we wanted to create an organization that is a little bit like the game Universalis, which I introduced a long time ago in XORG, which is this like anybody can describe anything towards the common discourse, but if somebody places a token on some phrase that has been described, it becomes a meaningful piece in the organization. And which I think is an interesting way of looking at organization in itself. Also, like you can play with how do you get the tokens? Maybe it's every member gets 3 tokens a week or whatever it is. It doesn't have to be like who is the richest. That can totally be I think quite easily described with the system. Like then actually the ways of the mind, rather than being like board-like or even offer-like, are somewhat different. And of course you can combine that they have this, plus they can make offers, and then you have another organization again. So I think that would be also useful. That's one potential direction to look at, is this sort of organizational creation from here.
Yeah, I would love that. I would love that.
So exotic organizations and maybe game very like game-like organizations also in the spirit of it, which I think becomes possible from here. Yeah, we could even create such a thing, and if we create it, it can exist. Then it's up to others to recognize its existence. But here the existence is everybody's power. Everybody has the power to create existence. I mean, we can at some point we can talk about it, like, and I can do a way better, like, let's say starting blocks rather than trying to tell the whole being COVID addled. But starting blocks in the sense like here's some basic pieces to compose, and why it doesn't have to be difficult, because it doesn't have to be.
It was much better understandable than you might think.
Yeah, and we spoke about the offer as well, a considerable amount of time. And this, yeah, I agree with Eva.
Yeah, actually the unlike offer is kind of a take on this. Like
Yeah.
it's a kind of later the development. It's built upon like this logic, but a little bit updated. Let's put it that way. but this kind of like offer protocol sets this like in the member, it says member has the right issue an offer and participate in an offer, which means that any member can create them, and then any member can participate them, but the rules of participation are set by the offer itself. So somebody is asking for, hey, I would like to make this kind of event, and I think it needs this and that. Like, then you can participate in the sense of saying, okay, I can provide this or that. You can also make a counter offer, but like I would do it this way, like slightly changing it, but then the original offer maker has to accept it. So it has this sort of basis of like, once again, by the way, it forms a certain distributed governance in itself. I'm not saying that it's the distributed governance, but here, if you're doing decisions of what are you doing by these offers, there is no need for central power to decide the actions. The actions are decided by people contributing to the offers to the point that they become possible. And then they are decided to be engaged. So like towards this offer that asked for quite little and it's a smaller operation, these three people actually contributed to it, and therefore it became a real thing and created a project out of it. Whereas this larger offer actually required like 10 people to contribute it to actually make it the real thing, but it got those. And some other offer didn't actually fulfill these promises and never got made, but there was no like general voting needed, etc. So that is also interesting, because I think this sort of having decisive decision power that is actually distributed is a key factor that is often missing, especially from DAOs, which are just voting. So yeah, like but I can at some point walk through, not now, but we can use this to create an organization, maybe by so that we think first what kind of organization we want to create. I would kind of like, it would be good to make something like simple, because it can always be expanded upon, but also interesting for us. What would be an interesting topic to organize around? And then create the kind of basic pieces for it. And I think we could do that in like roughly one session. It probably isn't like finished, but it's like functional in a draft form.
Sounds good to me.
Yes, we can visit that. Any other comments, questions, points of or points of conclusion for our sessions today?
I think it was great that we came back to the jigsaw puzzle thinking and that conversation. It was very interesting again.
I agree. Like I think in that there was actually a lot of I think powerful things happening there in terms of this sort of taking meaning to your own hands and turning meaning from this is how I read it to this is how I play with it. And that those are for me the two key things that is quite powerful in that, because if that is possible, it means that this should be possible with any mean, which I do think is possible. Like, not that everything works equally well, but that it becomes this way of turning meaning into operative or playable thing. Any other last comments?
Play yourself into a healthy state again.
I'm trying. I think I probably have to talk less today, that I will not play out my voice. It's getting there, but yes, and keep your lives healthy enough and interesting enough in the meanwhile. And we can put this organizational creation as a pin towards the future, whether it's next week or somewhere else. All right.
Take care, Pecco.
Yes,
I
take care.
will stop the recording.